I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. Good morning. Today we are entering the season of Rohatsu. In the Zen Buddhist world, every December we celebrate the awakening of the Buddha that occurred as they sat in meditation 2,500 years ago under the Bodhi tree. Shakyamuni Buddha reopened or rediscovered the path of perfect peace for all beings in this time and place in the universe. Buddhism shares that there are Buddhas for other worlds, other universes, other dimensions, way beyond what we humans have the capacity to know about. And that there are Buddhas for times, for eons that are very far from our current age. So Siddhartha Gautama, the person who becomes Shakyamuni Buddha, is the Buddha for our time. This morning I wish to share a part of his story of awakening. Hearing this story for me touches the deep heart that knows that the promise of the spiritual path is real, knows that letting go, receiving the embrace of the world, vibrant inquiry into what this life is about, are all necessary ingredients in the fulfillment of this life. The Buddha's story is our story. Stories like this one are beautiful because we get to recognize that this resonates with our own experience. Seeing impermanence and death sometimes affects us very deeply, and we long to understand what they really are. The path of listening to the heart's deep call sometimes gives rise to grief and despair. Fresh energy in life can come unexpectedly and turn us to what is wholesome. It is said that all of the activity and teaching of Zen rests within the context of Shakyamuni Buddha's story of awakening. I share part of the story today to rekindle or to fan the flame of aspiration for awakening that lives in your body. Whether your next steps today involve entering the matrix of Rohatsu Sesshin, the 7-day meditation intensive that recapitulates, relives, and honors the Buddha's awakening, or your next steps involve engaging sincerely with your daily life context, this story is for you. It is for everyone who wishes to listen. Hogen Roshi shared with me this book that was published this year, The Story of the Buddha, as told by Zen teacher John Tarrant. And when I read it, I was crying by the end, and I really hope to get us through together so that we can all be on this same journey together. In the interest of time, I cannot read the whole thing from the Buddha's birth to the Buddha's start of his teaching career, but we'll look at a large chunk of the Buddha's life. This is how the introduction to the story begins. In the beginning, there was silence and non-time. The universe had not yet begun. But even silence is a step. It repeats. It's the beginning of a journey. At the time of our story, the universe had acquired many features and forms of life. But there were still gaps in the sequence of time, gaps that were left over from the beginning. In those gaps, strange things happened. Spirits and beings from other realms worked openly together to shape the fate of humans. A dream of a white elephant made a woman pregnant. Horses wept. The Lord of the demons was lonely. It wasn't hard to recall previous lives. And a black snake dragon king could remember what had happened in a previous universe. Perhaps the story really begins with this mysterious black snake dragon king, who barely notices whether we are in a universe or in the non-time between universes. Meanwhile, this dragon lives in a pool at the foot of a waterfall in a great forest. The story moves ahead when the queen, who became pregnant in a dream and had great joy of her pregnancy, died shortly after the birth. The child, a boy, survived. In his grief, the old king grasped his kingdom with hands like claws. All news and evidence of sickness, old age, and death was hidden from his son. The prince was raised inside this illusion and struggled to find his way out. There were forces who wished him well and forces who tried to conceal his true situation. It is still hard to tell which of these was which. The prince left home on his great white horse in the dead of night, the very night his own child was born. In this way, he forsook everyone he loved and, as an afterthought, all that he owned. In his understanding, he had to approach what he longed for by losing everything. One thing that I find so compelling and deeply touching about the telling of this story in the version John Tarrant tells is that John Tarrant's vision goes beyond just the physical reality of what happened to this person and how this person lived their life. It opens up this mythic vision, this vision of poetry, and celebrates that which is not just understood by the thinking mind. And I find that very compelling. There's an intuition that knows that the story is true. So that's the basic context for the story that I will pick us up on partway through. I will pick up the story as written by John Tarrant after the Prince Siddhartha ventures outside of the palace with his best friend, Channa, and sees an elderly person a sick person and a corpse for the very first time. He begins to wonder what could be behind these appearances, and he's also disturbed by what he sees. Seeing a pilgrim, a person of satisfaction, thrusts the conviction into his mind that a journey is required. I must leave this palace. The journey is not easy. It begins with the heartbreaking decision to leave behind his wife and child. Thankfully, they are reunited later, but much later. So more of the context. The Buddha already has his palace and everything that can be wanted, along with a wife and a child. He is not hungry or mistreated by a stepmother. His father is not absent. He is not a younger son. War has not come to his lands. And in spite of his wealth and ease, he is suffocating. His discontent is not merely a recognition of the human condition, but a raw suffering and desire, an impetus to see through, to see into, to see exactly. This means to look at the world, but also and especially to investigate the mind. All journeys have some tendrils dangling down into the inner life, but now the inwardness is explicit. Understanding is the goal. Because he was a prince and knew a great deal about acquiring things, the Buddha began by subtraction. He shed his newborn child, his wife, his father, the woman who raised him, his palace, his clothes, his jewelry, his sword, his horse, his best friend, and his food. He turned toward poverty, hunger, and doing without. After that, it became a wisdom path to look closely at suffering and death. Pilgrims meditated in graveyards, and hospices became places of discovery. The prince began to listen to silence. He thought the blessing bestowed by the queen, his mother, might still exist somewhere inside the world. As the story turned inward, more questions appeared. Who am I? What do I really, really want? How do I know and feel my life? Why do we die? Does consciousness depend on having a body? Is the universe itself conscious, or is consciousness some kind of addition late in the game? And hidden inside these questions, nevertheless, how can we love life and each other? The journey is, in an explicit way, about the nature of mind and of consciousness, and this gives it a special place in the human legacy. So, without further ado, let us enter the story of the Buddha's awakening. As I said, he sorrowfully leaves the palace, the only place he has ever known, and the only people he has ever really known and loved face to face, heeding the call. Siddhartha set out on his long road into everything unknown. At first, he sought out reputable teachers and took on the practices they recommended. He watched a hermit purify himself by fasting and enduring pain. He experimented with this practice, At this stage, he was happy simply to be trying a new path. It was far from the luxury of the palace, and he liked that. It seemed to simplify matters, though other benefits were not obvious. He realized it might be difficult to discover what he sought. So next he went to teachers who focused directly on the mind. The first one taught an ancient philosophical system that merged into a practice. Siddhartha learned to inquire into his thoughts and to notice that suffering ran all through the mind. He learned also to endure pain and to concentrate so deeply on an object, such as the breath, that all pain disappeared. He entered states in which there seemed to be no thought. His teacher invited him to stay and teach alongside him, but Siddhartha could tell that a small part of his heart was not at rest, and he moved on, without knowing exactly what he was seeking. The next teacher focused entirely on method. He taught Siddhartha to concentrate ever more deeply and subtly, to navigate those meditation states that had a form and could be remembered, and those that didn't. Siddhartha's senses were cleansed. The green of the forest was green, 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 and the sky became endlessly pure. Waking and sleeping were similar in an intriguing way. Few thoughts stuck in his mind. When his body was in pain, his mind could remain clear. But whenever he stood up from meditating, his feelings often captured him, and unhappiness would appear without warning. Just when things seemed to be going well, disturbing thoughts would catch him off guard. He felt grief for the life he had left behind and annoyance at his companions. This wasn't a special, refined, spiritual unhappiness. It was the same dissatisfaction he had known in the palace. There didn't seem to be a way to ward off something that was unpredictable and apparently just part of being human. He practiced sincerely, but at the end of every day, he felt he was missing something, as if he had not completed a crucial task he was meant to do. As a last resort and in desperation, he went to the kingdom of Magadha and became an ascetic. It was almost giving up, but not quite. He lived naked and alone in the ancient forests. He slept on a bed of thorns, ate a grain of rice a day, and meditated in the charnel grounds where the bodies were burned. He was lonely, and sometimes he was afraid. Wild animals came around the graveyards at night, but they left him alone. He looked like a skeleton, and a group of 5 other ascetics was impressed and took him as their leader. They too had been rich and had left home. One day, near starvation, Siddhartha fainted. When he regained consciousness, he was alone and discouraged and began to think. The practices he had done all went in the expected direction. Everything he did was like the life he had left behind. His renunciation was full of desire and striving. He had become prince of the ascetics, and he was also very tired. It's easy to feel ashamed of your life and to think that something must be done to feel worthy, he thought. At this moment, he remembered the day when he was a child under the rose apple tree. Everything was complete, sufficient, and without effort. A kind of freedom was already present beneath whatever was happening. There was nothing to add, nothing to take away. And as his mind roamed around, a thought formed itself. Perhaps this is the direction that leads to awakening. At the same time, an old question appeared. Are you afraid of this happiness? No, he thought. No, I'm not afraid of this happiness. Drifting in this way, Siddhartha fell asleep. He dreamed of space and vastness, and of his mother smiling. Then shapes appeared. He was climbing into the Himalayas in a temple there. A queen welcomed him. She gave him many teachings, the Heart Sutra among them, as well as other secrets that would remain hidden for centuries. He rose thinking, today I will awaken. Meanwhile, in a nearby town, on the night of the full moon, a woman named Sujata also had a dream. The dream gave her a set of instructions. She didn't hesitate. She followed the instructions. She went out to her family's herd and milked 1,000 cows. She fed the milk to 500 cows. Then, taking that milk, she fed it to 250 cows, and so on, down to the last 8 cows. Then she took the condensed, rich milk from those last 8 cows and mixed it with rice. She poured the milk rice into a golden bowl and walked out into the forest as the dream had told her to do. That's as much as she knew. Siddhartha was sitting under a tree, having just awakened from his own dreams. He was so skinny and bony that Sujata thought he was the spirit of the tree. A faint light glowed from inside him. She smiled. She offered the bowl of milk rice, saying, "May this bring you as much happiness to eat as it has brought me to make." Siddhartha opened his eyes. She floated toward him, shaking with joy, and catching her delight, he drank, breaking his fast of years. He always remembered that meal. The milkmaid's gift and blessing were a return. Sujata was a force greater than his striving. This was the first time he had been defeated, and that was promising. However, the ascetics he had been practicing with arrived just in time to see him receiving the bowl from Sujata. They had been his companions in austerity, and now they repudiated him, and so he was alone to face the coming night. When he had finished eating, Siddhartha stood and stretched and walked to the riverbank. He was exhilarated. He waded in, and the water had a happy feel. It restored him. He threw the bowl into the river, saying, "If it floats upstream, I will awaken this very night." The golden bowl indeed floated against the current, disappearing upstream. It came to a place with ancient, overhanging trees and a waterfall with a whirlpool below it. There the bowl swirled around and was drawn down into the palace of the Black Snake Dragon King, an ancient being named Mahakala. The bowl sank down and banged lightly against 7 other bowls, making a dull clink. This was not really something new for the dragon, who had received bowls in just this way from the 7 previous Buddhas. With a feeling for time that was slow and vast, the dragon thought that the most recent Buddha had died just the day before, and hearing the sound of the bowl, thought, "So soon," and was happy that a new Buddha was already about to appear. The bowl was received as a gift, and in this way, someone else became a friend to Siddhartha. After the heat of the day had passed, Siddhartha went back to his tree. On the way, he met a grass cutter, Sotiya, who gave him a bundle of soft, fragrant grass to sit on. Siddhartha went to the south side of the tree, but it was as if he stood at the hub of a great wheel and someone was treading on the rim. The earth sank to hell in front of him and rose up to heaven behind him. He moved to the west, and the same thing happened, and it happened again in the north. But in the east, facing the direction of sunrise, he found the spot that did not move. He sat down on the immovable seat, vowing not to get up again until he had awakened. The light departed, trees and shapes became indistinct. The night came on, full of promise and danger. Out of the twilight appeared Devaputra Mara, the chief of demons, seducer of souls, lord of death, dark king of the world of form. When Siddhartha drank the rice milk, Mara had become fascinated by him and now attacked with all his horde. Spears, fire arrows, and rocks fell from the air. The fire arrows turned into flowers and the stones into many colored lights. Fear itself became something to wonder at, something with its own beauty. Mara tried to seduce Siddhartha by offering lovely women to him. There were women who smiled and promised delight, women who needed him to rescue them, women who understood him so deeply that he was reminded of the mother he never knew, and he saw that they were all aspects of himself. Like his fear, desire, and sorrow, became freeing in themselves. Then a wild wind rose, and floods came. There was a shower of rocks, a shower of burning coals, and a shower of mud. But after fear and desire, these assaults were an afterthought. Mara's final strategy was argument. He challenged Siddhartha, asking, "By what right do you claim the seat on which you sit?" For Siddhartha, something unstoppable was unfolding. He didn't really care what questions he was asked. Mara continued, "I have my armies to bear witness for me," he said, "but who will speak for you?" Siddhartha's hand answered. Almost out of courtesy, he reached down and touched the ground. The voice of the earth goddess, Bhumi Devi, rose from below. "I can bear witness." The sun and the moon paused. The animals bowed. Mara howled, and his howl diminished as he fled. In the first watch, the night proper began. Siddhartha went deeper into the vastness, into great silence, understanding many things. He remembered his childhood and the mother who gave birth to him. Then he remembered that he had lived before, remembered the first life, the second life, the third life, the 10th life, the 20th life, the 50th life, the 100th life, the 1,000th life, the 100,000th life, the countless formations of the universe, the countless destructions of the universe. He remembered what his given names had been, what his surnames were, what tribes he had belonged to, what he ate, what pleasures and sorrows he experienced. He remembered lives that were not his own and could see no significant difference. His life seemed to be a dream inside a dream. In the second watch of the night, he understood cause and effect and the many realms of existence and rebirth. Gods drifting in splendor, the wrathful gods fascinated and absorbed by war, animals, humans, hungry ghosts who are never satisfied, demons tormented in the depths of hell. He saw them all. Again, he confirmed that there was no fixed substance in the universe, and also nothing that does not change. He felt compassion for the suffering he witnessed. He saw that even Mara, the king of the demons, was lonely and afraid of being without him. In the third watch, the night deepened. The thoughts and stories from the day died down. It became obvious that everything is dependent on every other thing and has no nature apart from its relation to other things. Siddhartha could find no enduring self that needed to be protected or enhanced. He noticed his meditation had stages of ever-deepening concentration, and he explored them. He saw the noble truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path out of suffering. In the fourth watch, it grew colder. The Hindu gods who had seen his birth returned to greet him. Flowers fell from the sky, and just before dawn, the first birds called. Siddhartha looked up and saw the morning star and awakened. He cried out, "I and all beings of the great earth have at this moment attained the way." Siddhartha remained under the Bodhi tree for 7 days, wanting nothing, feeling what had happened. Then he said, "Life after life, I looked for the builder of the house and could not find him. But now I can see you, builder. I have snapped the rafters and broken the ridge beam. I will not build. I will not build this house of pain again." My mind is free of its conditions now. I am delivered. Rebirth has ended. The true life is here. I have done what I set out to do. As a flame blown out by the wind cannot be described, I am free from worries, the conditions that make the self. A great light spread out from the Bodhi tree. The sick were healed. The doors of prisons swung open, and even the recently dead were restored to life. Now Mara returned. He argued that the Buddha should rest in the great peace he had found and avoid the world and the turmoil of other people. But the black snake dragon king came to give protection, winding great coils underneath the Buddha as he sat, and raising 7 hooded heads over him to shield him. After he had sat for 7 days, Siddhartha looked around and was filled with love for the world and its beings. He said, "This world is burning. What we want causes us to be afraid. We call our pain ourself. We have things the wrong way round." And he was moved to leave his seat and go out to teach. beginning at the deer park with the 5 companions who had shared his austerities. After this, he was known as the one who comes thus, the Tathagata. Siddhartha went on to become the Buddha and gave the teachings that can free anyone from suffering, even the people hearing this story. He had many interesting adventures, and his teaching was taken up and went to all the corners of the earth, and finally arrived in this room today. But all that is a story for another time. I want to zoom in on a few junctures in this journey and appreciate them a little more. And we could pause at any of those sentences and feel the implications and the depth. The pivot point in Siddhartha's practice takes place when he receives the abundant offering of life from Sujata. He sees that up until then, his quest has a flavor of seeking, longing, and striving. True awakening begins to happen only when this person completely opens up to the support of another, when the fullness of life is taken in. Life is good. It's really good. Being nourished is good. Giving the gift of generosity itself is good. Sujata's generosity, giving the gift of a golden bowl of rice milk, comes from a deep intuition and deep connection with the forces in the universe that are larger than her own agenda or plans. She knows that simply making a beautiful offering is good and complete. The dream she had does not show that her offering is for the future Buddha, the savior of this world. The dream shows that making an offering is good in itself. Further, we can say that this is the pivotal lesson for all the past Buddhas. Siddhartha's bowl floats upstream and enters the black snake dragon king's den, where it clinks and clanks against the 6 or 7 bowls of the previous Buddhas. I love seeing and hearing that scene in my mind. Can you hear it? Ding. The past Buddhas all opened up to the fullness of receiving offerings and being supported. Receiving encouragement and support, resting and enjoying life does not negate the necessity of the intense longing that future Buddhas, bodhisattvas, practitioners feel and are guided by in their lives. Growing up, the deep intuition at Siddhartha is living in a temple of distraction guides him to take a completely different direction in life. Energetic engagement in spiritual practice is needed, but if the energy has the flavor of anxiously hoping to be worthy of the profundity of awakening, a more wholesome path may be called for. Siddhartha takes a step down that path when he receives Sujata's offering. Zooming in on the first watch of the night, In his final meditation period before the moment of awakening, Siddhartha sees all past lives, all lives. This illustrates that we are everyone, looking at everyone's lives and saying, that is me, greatly smooths out the energy of strife, anger, competitiveness, and fear, and greatly opens up the heart of compassion. The Buddha's story does not begin with the birth of a baby who is born under auspicious signs and is destined to become a great spiritual being. In a way, it does not have a beginning. It just is. It is true. It is the universal story of being human. The Buddha lived every life there is to live, not just one of royalty and luxury. Within all those lives, this being asks the question, what is this life? How can I make the best out of this situation? How can I bring forth generosity and clear seeing? The coming back to actualizing sincere questioning and sincere engagement is the energy that leads to Buddha's complete awakening. Life after life, moment after moment. This realization in the first watch of the night invites us to a deeper understanding that love and gratitude is the only way that makes much sense. And finally, I just want to repeat what the Buddha says after the 7 days of feeling his great awakening. After he had sat for 7 days, Siddhartha looked around and was filled with love for the world and its beings. He said, "This world is burning. What we want causes us to be afraid. We call our pain ourself. We have things the wrong way round." And he was moved to leave his seat and go out to teach. May we, for these next 7 days, feel our life, feel what is happening, feel the awakening that happens, has happened, is in time, and is beyond time, in us, in everyone else. Thank you so much for listening.